Hey everyone, welcome to week one of stress management. So we are going to get started this first week with the big question of what is stress? So to get started, I am going to try to put myself down here. Oh, there I am. I'm down in the corner. I have students say they kind of like being able to see me now and then, so hopefully it's okay. Anyway, so let's get started. What is stress? And I want you to think about that, not in terms of what the text is going to tell you or any text or any official documentation, but what you think of stress. How do you define it? What has it been like for you in your life? So ask yourself, how do I define stress? And most this whole class is about how do we learn to cope with stress? How do we learn to manage it? And hopefully with an understanding of the importance of that we learn to manage our stress, because I do believe stress to be the universal language, that we as human beings understand it, that we all experience it. Now, we may not all experience it in the same way, the same things may not stress us out, but we all kind of, when somebody says, oh, I'm so stressed out, we can relate. We get it. But so then the other question comes, though, before we move on into kind of what is the stress we want to manage. Is there such a thing as good stress? Because I think that's an important one. So when I talk about stress in face-to-face classes, um, I'll have students answer that question. So think for yourselves. Is there such a thing as good stress? Um, and what does that look like? What is the goodness of stress? And well, the answer is yes, that there is such a thing as good stress, and we actually have a word for it. It is called, that first one up there, eustress. EU, the little prefix EU, means good. So good stress. It is positive stress that keeps us vital and excited about life. So it may be the things that we may not think of it as stress. We think of it as anticipation or excitement, or that we feel challenged and ready to go and excited. But the body experiences it in some ways as stress. So it's that which drives us forward, motivates us. It's a motivator. It gets us off the couch eating, Cheetos and watching Netflix, or chocolate in my case, watching Netflix, and into doing something. So it sees the things in front of us as challenges instead of threats. Um, there are people, that talk today about stress in terms of, if we just shifted how we understand it from being a threat to a challenge, that it would really shift and adjust things inside of us, the things before us. So what we see naturally as challenges rather than threats are the things that we might consider eustress. New stress is neutral stress. So it's things we might watch on television, and these days hear on in podcasts and radios and on our radio, and even see on Facebook. And there's a lot of it that is, I think, crossing a line from new stress to distress, which we'll talk about. But things that we might see that are happening in another part of the world that don't necessarily personally impact us. But because we're such a global world now, we have such an opportunity to read about, see things, hear about things so quickly and easily, that those things can become very stressful to us. So if we hear about a tsunami in Japan, it can be distressing to us in a different way, though. It's because it feels so distant. And so we might feel rather neutral about it. It doesn't have personal consequences. But anyway, we call that new stress. Distress is the one that probably came to mind first when I said, oh, I'm so stressed out, or something like that. We feel distress, bad stress. It is acute or chronic. There's two different kinds, acute and chronic. So let's talk about those. Oh, first, sorry. We'll talk about this for just a second. I'm going to put myself here so I'm not in the way. When we're talking about if something is good, there is this model to consider. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson Curve, that we as humans actually perform best in life, we thrive, and maybe that's even a better word than just optimal performance, but we're thriving and flourishing, living optimally when we are kind of in the middle, when we have enough eustress to motivate us and move us forward, but not enough acute and chronic to tip us into distress. So if you look at this, our performance level on the left, our level of stress on the bottom, if we have no excitement, if we have no eustress, no stress going on, we might get bored. And then there we'll feel unmotivated. We're binging whatever we're binging in terms of Netflix or all of that. And we just can't. I actually talk about it in terms of Newton's laws of motion for people. An object at rest stays at rest. We don't have what it takes to move ourselves forward. Um, I'm sorry. I need to go back one. So we might be bored. If we have too much is going on, we are too aroused, too much stimulation, that's high stress. It is too hot. It's kind of the too hot, too cold is the Goldilocks thing. Too hot, too much overstimulation. We are stressed out and just can't manage. We're overwhelmed. I think we really get into overwhelm, boredom, overwhelm. And in the middle, we find that just right. Goldilocks is just right place, where we are aroused enough, motivated enough, stimulated enough that we move forward, we see things as challenges, we're excited about them, and we're ready to take them on. And that's where we perform optimally and experience life best. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. Next, we do have types of distress, that acute and chronic. So acute stress is the kind that our body was biologically set up for. We were physiologically and even maybe psychologically somewhat set up for acute stress. It is short term. Our nervous system is made evolutionarily in a way that when something stressful in a moment happens, it responds, it reacts, it can go into fight or flight, which we will talk a lot about later, but it'll go into fight or flight and manage it in that moment. And then it can be done with it, it can pass, and we can move beyond that. It is acute stress is short term to an immediate perceived threat that can be a real or imagined, but the body sees it. You see this word threat come up a lot. So that has a lot to do with how we define stress that is difficult for us, right? It's something that the system, even if we don't psychologically or cognitively think of it as a threat, our system perceives it as a threat. It is daily stress that can be positive or negative. So it can even be something. I think for some people that skiing downhill thing is actually a eustress, is exhilarating and exciting. For someone like me, it's really distressing. But anyway, road rage is, or even just take it as something you're driving along and someone pulls out in front of you and you have to respond quickly. Or you're walking in a dark alley alone at night and you need to be hyper vigilant and alert. Those kinds of things can be to the system, short-term, momentary things that it has to manage and it has to deal with in that moment. Chronic stress is that over and over and over and over and over again, and it seems never-ending and inescapable. It's when we have sort of turned on the stress outlet and we don't know how to turn it off, and the system is constantly feeling bombarded by things that are stressful. It can be a bad relationship or relationship or job. Sorry, that means correcting, or nonstop pressure. Just anything that's constant, and leaves the system constantly feeling under threat. So we're going to work. This is a very basic definition, and it could go. Your book will have a couple or a few that you might look at. You could find several online. Stress is a perceived threat. So, and that doesn't mean that it's not. It can be a real threat in the moment. Somebody is pulling out in front of you, or a perceived threat, which is things we'll talk about quite a bit too, that we just think something is threatening to us, to our mind, our body, our spirit, or our emotions. So it is a perceived threat to the system, one of our many systems within us. So these days, one thing about stress is that it is universally agreed upon that there is a link between chronic stress and many health-related issues. I think it's something like 80% of doctors' visits have some stress-related symptoms. Many of our chronic diseases, diabetes, blood pressure, heart disease, cancer even, they're finding links to stress, and a lot of the symptoms show up as stress symptoms, or things that have happened, that chronic stress over and over and over again, our system constantly feeling bombarded and under threat, over time is wearing out and wearing down and can show up as systems. So the big thing idea being that dis-ease can lead to disease. Dis-ease over time, over and over again, can lead to disease. So here we have just a chart that we show in the 1900s. We see that influenza pneumonia were one of the top 10 leading causes of death in the US. And in 2014, it was diseases of the heart, cancer, respiratory disease. So we're seeing that, and many of those top ones, especially those diseases of the heart, things that can come from high blood pressure or just will show with high stress symptoms. So it's an important thing that we need to talk about in our day and age, in our world. We still have a system, which we'll talk about this later, with what is health and well-being, that looks at the body or looks at illness just as a series of symptoms, and how do we alleviate those or look to cure them. And some of those cures and alleviations we need to discuss right here in this kind of class. They are lifestyle, they are how do we manage our day-to-day struggles and challenges that can impact our body, our mind, our emotions, and our whole system over time. So that's very important. So I am going to be doing this in very short screencasts and videos for several reasons. So I'm actually going to stop this one here, and I'll just pick up in the next one with this spot right here in the old stress response system.